Greetings from Tokyo, I'm Trip, and welcome to the Hammer of Wrath. This week, you and I are going to paint some Blood Angels characters. Let's go. This video is brought to you by Skillshare. Thanks for joining me in the studio. This week, I'm going to show you how I painted 4 characters for my growing Blood Angels army, but first, I want to talk very briefly about Shinjuku, or more specifically, Shinjuku Station. One of the few natural gifts that I happen to have been given was a great sense of direction. And I know it doesn't sound humble to say that, but my qualities are few and far between, so give me this. I pride myself on being able to find my way just about any place that I go. The 2 exceptions here are IKEA, or IKEA as they would call it here in Japan, and Shinjuku Station. It's my working theory that both of those places are small slivers of hell that have manifested on the earthly plane, and anyone that has to endure them is worse for it. Now, IKEA I can understand in a sort of Machiavellian space. It's meant for retail. They want you to get lost in there and wander past everything and buy as much as they can get you to buy. But Shinjuku Station is supposed to have a utilitarian purpose. However, unfortunately, due to the nature of urban growth, the station itself has sort of become this rat's nest of maze-like tunnels, and every time I'm there, I get turned around, without fail. And as someone who prides himself on his sense of direction, it can be extremely frustrating. If you do happen to travel through Shinjuku Station and find yourself turned around, please stop at one of the many information kiosks and ask for help. Not only do they speak English, but several other languages as well, and they're quite accustomed to travelers getting lost within the station. Well, that's enough about me getting turned around in one of Tokyo's biggest metro stations. Let's talk about the Blood Angels. Now, I have a lot of Space Marine armies at this point, but that's not going to stop me from making another, and I have a grand plan for my Blood Angels army. And just recently for Christmas, a good friend Jose gifted me both Lemartes and Astorath the Grim, so I came up with a plan for my dream Blood Angels army. So at this point, we have Dante, the Chaplain, the Blade Guard Ancient, and 3 squads of Blade Guard veterans complete. Today we're going to paint a Judiciar, Mephiston, Lemartes, and Astorath the Grim. So let me show you how I built and painted my characters for my Blood Angels army. I've had this Judiciar half finished since I got the Indomitus starter set in 2020. He was originally going to be a Dark Angel, that's why he has the greenish leather robes, but I realized that they synergize really well with Blade Guard veterans, and well, I have a ton of Blood Angels Blade Guard veterans, so we're going to press him into service to the Blood Angels. I'm going to use plate mail metal here from the Fanatic paint range by Army Painter. Great coverage, goes on in 2 coats over black. It's perfect for this. Now the robes, we're going to make those a more traditional leather, and when I was working on my Leagues of Votann Combat Patrol, I stumbled across this really great recipe for good-looking worn leather. I'm going to use a burnt umber here as a base coat, and once that's dry, I'm going to dry brush on Mournfang Brown from Games Workshop. That's like a warm, rich leather color. And when that's done, I'm going to take some Kislev flesh and dry brush that along just the highest and sharpest edges of the cloak. The next thing we're going to do is go through and do all of our gold ornamentation across the model. Here I'm using Greedy Gold from the Fanatic paint range. Again, their metallics have really great coverage. And when those paints are dry, we're going to go ahead and apply Reichland Flesh Shade Gloss on all of our golds. That keeps it lustrous and vibrant looking. Now for the leathers of the holsters and things, we're going to do something different on a different color leather. Here I've just laid down a khaki or sand colored base, and then we're just going to glob on contrast wildwood, and once that dries, we'll take out our Mournfang Brown again and just dry brush all the leather pouches and his gloves. It gives a really great leather effect that's a slightly different shade from the cloak. Once the shade has dried on the gold, we're going to go back through with a silver and highlight all of our topmost edges. This is going to give it some dimensionality and help it pop off the model, keep it from looking flat and lifeless. Now on the blade here, I decided to try something different. I had seen a tutorial online for creating burning blades, so we'll go ahead and take a really bright, pure, almost sun or lemon yellow and airbrush that onto the blade. I try not to brush paint yellows and whites, it's always really difficult. And then it's just a matter of going through and using some oranges and some burnt umbers, sort of doing this stippling on there to add this molten heat effect. And I'm pretty happy with the way that turned out. Now to finish the coat, we're going to go ahead and put some scratches and wear on this thing. I mean, obviously he's been tromping through thousands of worlds, murdering heretics and defending the Imperium. So we're going to go ahead and scratch that up with a really fine 00 brush. And I've masked off the rest of the model, and unfortunately it didn't focus very well, but I've used a color here. This is Angron Clear. It's really difficult to brush on, but it plays really well through the airbrush, and that I'm using that as the base armor color for my entire Blood Angels army. Now on the base here, I'm going to mix up a wash of Drakenhof Nightshade and Lamian Medium. That Drakenhof is just too intense, too rich straight out of the pot, so we'll mix that up. And once that's dry, I'm going to go ahead and dry brush a white back onto the base to bring that white marble back out. Then we'll go ahead and finish all the small details on the base, like the magazines, the spent shell casings, and this Aquila here. Now, because it's a resin base and a plastic model, we're going to use some super glue. When I can, I like to use super glue gel type. Gives you a little more control. And then we'll go ahead and put this really great death mask on him to make him more Blood Angels. I've also had Mephiston half finished for a little over 3 years, so I figured it was time to go ahead and finish him up as well. Here we're laying down a base coat of silver and then again that Angron Clear over the armor panels. This looks really great over a metallic, as you can see. Now I'm going to go ahead and mask that off using some poster tack, and then we'll get the airbrush out and we're going to put a black base coat down on the cape. And then once that's set, we're going to go through with a lighter gray. This is Mechanicus Standard Gray. And we're going to apply a top-down zenithal in order to get all of our folds highlighted. Once that's done, I go ahead and remove the poster tack, and as you can see, it has protected the work that we did earlier with the Angron Clear. Next, we'll just go through and using a brush very carefully finish off the areas that were underneath the mask. Here, I'm just using some black, and then we'll go through and highlight that with Mechanicus Standard Gray. And the last touch for the cape, we'll be taking some Mechanicus Standard Gray and a lighter gray, a cold gray, and just getting a quick dry brush to bring out all the highlights. While I've got the Mechanicus Standard Gray on my palette, we'll just quickly finish the inside of the Psychic hood, and then we'll move on to the lower robes. Here, I've taken my red, this is Vallejo Gory Red, and I've mixed that 1-to-1 with black. It gives this really dark, almost magenta color. We'll put a couple layers of that down. It doesn't have to have perfect coverage because then we're just going to take that gory red and apply it in multiple thin layers on the top facings of all the folds of the fabric. This is going to build up slowly layer after layer, and we're going to get a really strong, vibrant red at the top of all the folds that exaggerates the creases and shapes of the cape. Next, I'm going to go through and paint the hoses that connect to the power pack using plate mail metal from the Army Painter Fanatic range. I'll have a full review of the Mega set next month, but what I can tell you right now is that the metallics in the line are exceptional. I then worked my way around the model, putting down a rich brown anywhere there was going to be gold. This isn't essential, but what I've discovered is that if you put a dark earth tone underneath your golds, it gives them a much warmer appearance. We'll take a quick moment to shade the metallics on the plasma pistol and the power cables, and then move on to applying our gold. Here I'm using Greedy Gold from the Fanatic paint range, but honestly any gold would do so long as it's a bright shining gold. On the pauldron, I'm using Games Workshop's Corax White. This has excellent coverage for a white and will allow us to put truer, brighter whites on top after that. Working on his head here, we're going to apply a very thin wash of Reikland Flesh Shade over that white zenithal. We want him to have that waxy vampire appearance. And then we'll go ahead and put some blue energy in his eyes and very carefully bring out the center of his eyes with like this white as though they're glowing with psychic energy. Now for the hair, I've got this recipe for dirty blonde hair. I put down a khaki, and then what I'll do after I've got the khaki down is put down a wash of Agrax Earthshade. And once that dries, I'll go back through with a mix of khaki and yellow and just sort of dry brush the top of that to get the highlights out. We'll glue the head in, and I've kept this accessory belt separate. Honestly, if I had glued it in, there would have been no way we could have done the folds in the robe. Sub-assemblies aren't always necessary, but on things like this, you just sort of have to judge what would make the model easier or more difficult to paint. Here, we're applying some plate mail metal to his blade through the airbrush, and then we'll tape off half of it and get some Talisar blue contrast and a gradient to give it some visual interest. Using some plastic glue, we'll attach the power pack and the sword to the main model, finish off the last few details like his gloves, and apply the model to the base using plastic glue. Here I'm using Revell Contacta Pro. It'll seal through paint. It's exceptional. I can tell you that what I didn't wait 3 years to do was join the world's largest online learning community for creatives, Skillshare. Skillshare has thousands of creative classes in countless categories, and when you join the community, it will ask you what areas you are interested in, tailoring their recommendations specifically to your interests. For example, if you want to learn more about how acrylic paints behave, you can take a course from a professional artist that describes the nature of the paints and how to control them. Or if you're more interested in scale modeling, you can take a class that breaks everything down, including the tools and paints that you need, how to apply decals, or assemble the final model. The first 500 people to use my link in the description below will receive a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. Get started today. On to the new models. Recently, my friend Jose gifted me both Lemartes and Astorath for Christmas, and I was really excited to build and paint these. So here on Lemartes, we're going to put a black prime down, and how I do all of my Death Company is actually really simple. It's a black base coat, and then I mix a 1-to-1 mix of lead belcher and black, and I dry brush it over the model. We just want to get those top surfaces of every shape, help attract the light, round out those forms, and give it definition. All black models are really tricky to do because they become very flat. And to be honest, I don't have the skill to go around and edge highlight everything like you see on the Games Workshop box art. I'll then go through and apply my metallics on the bolter and the shoulder pauldron. Now, the right pauldron has to be a bone color, so here we're using a cold gray, and later we'll apply our khakis and bone colors on top of that. I like to go through and paint the soft seals and Mechanica standard gray, and then I'll go through and hit all of the trim with plate mail metal. There is a lot of trim on this. It's not as much as the Chaos Marine, but there was still plenty, and it took me quite a while to get through. Here we'll apply 2 coats of pale sand to get that bone color that we want. And then we'll go through and hit the golds that are here and there on the model. There isn't actually a lot outside of the Crozius. Now, this is going to take us 2 coats, and I could have put that brown tone underneath, but honestly, I was sort of in a rush to finish this, and I knew that 2 coats would get the job done. With all of our base coats down, it's time to go around the model and start shading it to bring out the details. Reikland Flesh Shade Gloss on all of the golds, of course, and Agrax Earthshade for the pauldron. Now here I'm going to apply a little too much, but then I'll dry my brush on a paper towel and wick away the excess. Once I've got that where I want it, I'm just going to go over the entire model. Anywhere that there's black armor and silver trim, I'm going to use Nuln Oil. And when that dries, we'll hit these individual rivets with Agrax Earthshade to give a little visual interest and some aging to the metals. Now, once the Agrax on the pauldron is dry, we'll go through with a bone white and hit those highlights. And because I wasn't getting the gradient that I wanted there, I just sort of masked that off and airbrushed it really quick. Now on the base, because all of my models are on these white marble bases, we'll do the Drakenhof Nightshade wash and then a dry brush of white to bring the highlights of the marble back up. And in this case, we got this really fun detail of all this gold inlay. And then, of course, all my Death Company have blood splattered on them, so we'll do that really quickly before we work towards final assembly. Now on the head, again, we're going to apply this Agrax Earthshade, and I did the same thing on the pauldron, but you look here, it's too much. But what we do is we take our brush, we dip it in Lamian Medium, and we push the shade to where we want it to be. We're going to move it away from the top of the skull so that it has a roundness, a highlight to it. Then we'll use that 000 brush to very carefully hit the edges of his fiercely glowing green eyes and pop that off because it's just hot glued to that sprue. And we'll use some plastic glue to attach it to the model. In this case, I'm using Tamiya Thin because the brush applicator allows for precision placement of the glue. Now on the engines here, I do something really simple. I just get a very watered down white. I put that in. It runs into all the recesses. And then I'll go through with a series of yellows and oranges, slowly working my way out from the center to create the heat effect. Now here again, we're going to use Revell Contact Pro because we have paint on the base and we want to make sure to get a strong bond. Our fourth and final character will be Astorath the Grim, and we're going to do a little surgery here. There's nothing wrong with the default pose. I like it just fine, but I saw this conversion online and wanted to give it a shot. So I very carefully repositioned the arms with a couple precise cuts and put it so that he was holding his axe sort of in front of him coming around for a swing. Now here I've put down our black prime, of course, and then we're going to do a zenithal. This is going to help us when we start to do the muscles on the suit, as you'll see later on. We want to make sure that our base matches the rest of the army, of course, so while we've got our mix of Drakenhof Nightshade and Lamian Medium out, we'll go ahead and apply that to our marble base. And here I had an idea. Why on earth is he painting Astorath's wings bright yellow and orange? Well, I want them to look like heat is coming out from the inside. I want to get this down into the crevices between, and my bright idea was to dry brush these to hit the top surfaces, make the feathers dark gray so that this was emanating from the inside. But as you can see, it just doesn't work. I don't have the skill for this. I'm sure a better painter could pull that off. So as you can see here, I just covered over it again in Mechanicus Standard Gray, and we'll try something a little more traditional. Now on the muscles here, I'm using Contrast Blood Angels straight out of the pot. Just put it wherever there's muscles on the suit. It flows in really nicely. We'll paint our soft seals with Mechanicus Standard Gray, and then we're going to go ahead and start shading the wings. Here I'm using Nuln Oil. We'll just go through and get all the feathers. On the axe, we'll use Contrast Skeleton Horde. And then once our wash is dry, we'll go back and dry brush the edges of those feathers to bring out the highlights and create some separation and definition. Now on the head here, we'll put down Mechanicus Standard Gray. And then I'm using Contrast Basilicanum Gray, which is like a dark gray-black to exaggerate the recesses. When that's set, I'll use my dark metal mix. This is 1 part lead belcher and 1 part black, and we'll go ahead and carefully apply that all over the model where the metal is in between the armor. Now I know that Astorath is normally gold. There's just something about that I don't really like. He's part of the Death Company. He has this very somber task, and I like the idea of his paint scheme being a bit more toned down, a bit more dark and brooding. Once that dries, we'll dry brush a few highlights using pure plate mail metal, and then we'll go through and on all the muscles here, I'm using Nuln Oil in the recesses. This is really going to bring out the details in those muscle strands and make everything pop. As you can see here, it also does an excellent job of sort of knocking back the saturation of that Blood Angel's contrast, and it really keeps everything in that sort of dark and somber tone. We'll cover the last vestiges of our horrible mistake on the wings here using our dark metal mix, and then move on to blending on his axe. Now here I'm using Army Painter's Fanatic paint range. All of their colors are organized in these really great triads, and so I'm just using a color combination of Imperial Navy and Black 1:1 to set that first layer. And then the second layer is just Imperial Navy. And for the third and lightest layer, I'm using Crystal Blue. And lastly, to bring out the nodes along the top of the axe, I'm using Bright Sapphire, which is the third color in that triad. And with that, we take care of a few final touches on the model and attach the head using Tamiya plastic cement. And there you have it, a Judiciar, Lemartes, Mephiston, and Astorath, all ready to lead our growing Blood Angels army into battle. I hope you enjoyed the video. It was my genuine pleasure to make and share it with you. If you'd like to support the channel, please like, comment, and subscribe. Help drive us to the front page of YouTube and grow our audience. Or you can always join our Patreon, linked in the description below. Now remember, joining the Patreon at any level grants you access to our private Discord server where like-minded hobbyists help each other out every day with honest and kind feedback. Thanks again for joining me, and I'll see you on the next one.